All right, everybody. Week 4 is in the books, us Titans of Fantasy are ready to break it down for you. As always, I'm your host Gary Daigle. With me, co-host Caleb Armstrong. Week 4 officially wrapped up here. Outside of the Monday Night Football game that's still going on.
Mm-hmm.
As usual, we record Monday nights, so you guys have your waivers and everything for Tuesday morning. But week 4, kind of a resurgence from the running back group after kind of being a wide receiver driven, couple weeks to open up the season. I think I saw something that said right now Saquon Barkley is the number 1 running back, but his overall points scored for running back 1 is the lowest since 1998, which is crazy. So no running back
Martin.
top running back has scored so few points. So it's kind of crazy. We just have seen so far the big dogs that are out there haven't been firing off kind of how we're used to for the first rounders.
Yeah, for sure. They said they're just going like a list of top guys on the, and there hasn't been, they haven't been horrible. They just haven't produced these huge gargantuan games. Like Christian McCaffrey's been putting up double digits each week. Jonathan Taylor was until he got injured this week, which we'll talk a little bit about today. Derrick Henry's finally starting to look like he's coming back to life a little bit. So, if you got burned by a couple of your first round picks, it's unfortunate, but it seems like some of them that were in the first round are starting to come back around a little bit here, gain some life.
Yeah.
So, like Garrett said about a couple episodes ago, we're going to start stuff a little different here from the beginning of each episode. And, we went on some hot streaks, hot and cold last week. Well, this week we're going to take guys who, based off draft capital or how they're doing so far in the year, we're going to do a quick keep, trade, cut since we're about just underneath a quarter of the way through the season so far. Mainly a quarter way through your fantasy leagues based off on playoffs and such. But so for our keep, trade, cut, our first 2, we actually have some mores involved here. And Garrett, I'm gonna be asking you who you would keep, who you would trade, and who you would cut. So Elijah Moore, DJ Moore, and Adam Thielen.
This one's gonna be tough to kind of open things up. Kind of all 3 guys are people you're more or less underwhelmed with. Thielen's interesting because I feel like their red zone offense, he's such an integral part of that to bounce back. But honestly, these 3 guys all kind of underwhelming thus far. I feel like Elijah Moore with Zach Wilson coming back has the highest likelihood to kind of change his season around. We saw some electric play out of him last year and some little sparks here and there thus far. But with Joe Flacco, they didn't seem to have the best chemistry. So I think I'll keep Elijah Moore. DJ Moore, I feel like his value's low, but I think people will look at him and say, he's a proven guy who could bounce back, so you might have some decent trade value. Not super great, but okay value still there for a trade. And I'm cutting Adam Thielen simply on the matter of, they are kind of doing other things on their offense. And I just don't know how integral he will be to, being a great contributor to your fantasy team.
Yeah, it's kind of funny that you say this. I wanted to point out some stuff here with these guys, and they all are specialized in their own thing. Adam Thielen right now actually has had a couple decent fantasy weeks back-to-back, and so he's actually the highest right now on the wide receiver rankings out of those 3. But then again, you talk about like how he's been mainly a touchdown guy, red zone guy, where the other 2 are definitely more, I would say, get more targets in a game. And I just want to point this out that DJ Moore has actually one of the highest separation ratios right now in the league, and Elijah Moore is top 10 in air yards in the league, which we talked about, like I said, in week 1. That usually leads to big weeks when you're up in the air yards. So I like your strategy kind of there. DJ Moore, we been so consistent, and it's funny, they showed that every single player from the 21-22 roster is worse in fantasy this year with Baker than they were with Sam Darnold. Nobody has done well with Baker, which Baker actually has like a 15-something QBR right now, which is one of the worst for a starting quarterback to start ever in the first 4 games.
Yeah, it's rough. I mean, I know the conversation going into the season was things can only go up. Things can only go up. Well,
best QB he's ever had. Yeah.
Oh, gosh. I feel like that statement has gotten so overblown. I remember 2 years ago we were talking about the Bears situation and the 49ers situation. Oh, things can only get better with these rookie quarterbacks. Like, you just never know, and you can't always speculate that the other side of the leaf is better. So, Yep.
Yeah, for sure. So the second wave here now is some running backs are all roughly right now in the same level or tier of rankings. We have Dameon Pierce, Chase Edmonds, and Antonio Gibson.
Yeah, so this one's a little bit interesting because I'm actually going to go a different way than probably the consensus is on this one. Antonio Gibson right now has been getting pretty consistent touches between 13 and 14 carries a game. Good looks in the red zone too, and now with their rookie being knocked out in the passing game, I think there's a good chance that we could see a little change in the scenery. So Jahan Dotson knocked out for the next couple of weeks, hamstring injury. He's been their red zone threat. He's got 3 or 4 touchdowns so far in 4 weeks.
I think 3 or 4.
Good start. Brian Robinson is coming off of IR after he suffered that gunshot wound. We expect him to be back in the fold, and going into the season, he had a lot of hype. I think there's going to be too much hype that he's going to come back and be the guy in the offense. I just can't see it. Like, I think there's a chance that at some point throughout the season, he might become semi-relevant, but I don't think you can recover from something like that and be an elite level athlete so quickly. So I'm actually going to keep Antonio Gibson. I'm going to trade Dameon Pierce based on that rookie bell curve. Everybody's kind of hyping him up right now. He had a monster game, so he might be a kind of guy that you could actually try to use him to buy low on some of those elite level players that haven't been performing as well. I saw one thing saying, would you trade Dameon Pierce right now for Najee Harris? I mean, I don't know how I feel about that given the Steelers offense, but it's something that, hey, that's a guy that was a first-round running back that people are entertaining that kind of thing right now. It's kind of crazy. So that's the kind of conversation you want to have around Pierce right now is he could be a guy that you can sell high on. And Chase Edmonds, in that offense that we've seen most are pretty involved, and now with Tua getting knocked out, things could be changing. I don't anticipate that offense to be scoring as much as it was, and so Chase Edmonds would be my easy cut for this group.
Yeah, I like your approach at all these here. I probably would have flipped the Pierce and Gibson for me. This week, I'll talk about a little bit down the road here, but Gibson saw his least amount of touches this week. We saw a little bit more McKissick involved, and then also I can't remember Williams. Can't remember his first name. I think he had like 5 carries for 50 yards. He's their RB4 on the roster. So a little bit to see, a little dispersed room there. But, I get your approach. So Gibson's been – you can't complain for what he's done so far. So, and then getting into some overperforming tight ends. If you drafted these guys at the tight end, kind of dead zone, I guess you can say. These are some guys, though. It's kind of funny. Garrett and I talked about 2 of these guys quite a bit this offseason as being potential sleepers for us. And if you listen in and you grab some of these guys in your drafts, you are very, very happy right now. So David Njoku, Gerald Everett, and Pat Freiermuth.
Yeah, so of these, me personally, if looking at this group of 3, of them, the one that I think is going to sustain their value the longest is Gerald Everett. We just got word that, that offense, my brain right now. Keenan Allen sustained another setback with his hamstring injury. So it sounds like we don't know necessarily when he's going to be back quite yet. And right now, Gerald Everett's kind of carved out his role in that offense. He's seeing both a good level of targets and he's getting good looks in the red zone. So
Yep.
he's a guy I would want to keep in this group. As potential, right now, he's a top 6 tight end, and I think that's something that he could potentially hold on to throughout the season, being well involved.
Yeah.
Of the other two, Njoku and Freiermuth, I feel like Njoku probably has the higher trade value, so I would trade him and cut Freiermuth. I think, people might be looking long term with that offense for when Watson comes back after week 11. Freiermuth, we just haven't seen enough out of that Steelers offense. There's still a lot of weapons there, and with the quarterback change happening, we just still don't know necessarily what's going to happen with the tight end situation. Freiermuth might still be involved. He might still be getting those looks, but I don't think his trade value is higher than Njoku's, and I would not keep him over Everett just due to the scoring touch in that offense.
Yeah, and I would kind of go with the same. I like the way you went with this. I would have gone the same way, but Njoku and Fireman for me are so they're level right now.
Oh yeah,
Njoku has had 3 solid games in a row. This week kind of got hurt his fantasy value a little bit by a fumble, but it definitely seems like he's at number 2 target in that offense for the Browns there, where Freiermuth has been so I would just say so consistent this year. He's been, but like you said, we don't know what it's going to be like with Pickett now at the starting quarterback. It seemed like Trubisky had a lot of faith in Freiermuth, and we don't know. That offense has not been too pretty. Where the Browns have actually been a little surprising at how they've been going through with Brissett and haven't been a solid, offense in general this year. So, Gerald Everett, though, like we said, we talked about it all off season, Garrett. We liked Everett. We loved his landing. I put out those crazy stats about the Chargers tight ends, and he is falling right in line with what we said, basically. And I would say overperforming what we thought he would be.
Yeah.
So then our last one is 3 underwhelming, I would say, quarterbacks. They haven't been bad by any means, but they haven't been what you drafted them to be. And it's funny, 2 of them are from the same division here. And that division's been kind of underwhelming in itself in general. So Derek Carr, Matthew Stafford, who's currently playing right now, so don't really know what he's doing this week so far, and Russell Wilson.
Yeah, this is going to be kind of the toughest one for me. I feel like Derek Carr has been, he's got good passing volume numbers. He's getting a lot of attempts every game, but that offense in the passing game really hasn't been clicking. And the fact that he just hasn't lit up for many electric plays. He was having 2 touchdowns for his first 3 weeks, didn't throw any this past week. You look at Matt Stafford through 3 weeks, not including the game that's currently on. He just same kind of thing. Last year we saw a lot of good passing volume looks in the red zone. This year that offense just hasn't been scoring that much as we're used to. Yeah. And Russell Wilson, it's kind of the same story. Through the first 3 weeks, he was pretty terrible. He threw 2 touchdowns total through the first 3 weeks. And then this week, finally, you got a good one out of him where he threw, still his yardage wasn't great, 237 yards, 2 touchdowns.
Yeah.
But then he ran one in.
That's
so,
what.
Looking at these 3, it's like I think Carr is going to be fine. But between Stafford and Wilson, I think Stafford is on the best offense. But as far as for your average league, what you're really looking for here is, because all these guys are kind of your middling quarterbacks anyway, you're looking for the one that can bounce back the best and jump into that elite tier level. So honestly, I feel like Wilson has the best pedigree of them all. He's off to probably the roughest start of the 3, but I would still want to keep him just for the thought that he has the best chance of rebounding, the best chance of jumping back into that elite tier group. We have seen every year it seems like he goes through a rough stretch. Typically it's later on in the season, but right now He's still getting acclimated to that offense. Unfortunately, we just saw the Javonte Williams injury, but I think they still have plenty enough weapons in that offense where it's not going to hurt him. So I'm going to keep Wilson. I'm going to try to trade Carr. Oh, man. Trade Carr and cut Stafford. It's a tough one. Honestly, I've seen it in both 10 and 12 team leagues. I've seen each of these three guys on waivers so far.
Yeah, and I just want to point it out, Matt Stafford is not blowing anything off the charts right now. It's almost halftime. He's 11 for 17 for 82 yards. So, kind of back in your take there.
Yeah.
And then our last one is 3 running backs who are hot, I would say, right now, and off some big weeks. And that is, they were all drafted as RB2s, and they have been performing at RB1 / upside RB2 right now. So, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Miles Sanders, and J.K. Dobbins.
So I'm going to start this off by saying I would not cut any of the 3.
Yeah.
But if I had to choose between the 3, I'm going to go with Dobbins. Honestly, he's having he had a pretty good bounce back week this week, getting in the end zone twice.
Yeah.
But that offense has still actually kind of been run through Lamar Jackson, good passing volume, and he's been running great. So they've been efficient. Dobbins is still a great option out there. Thing is, right now, Miles Sanders is probably my keep out of this group. Mm-hmm. He's been doing great. He had another 27 carry week this week. He really popped off, did pretty great. And throughout the season so far, he's been a consistent mainstay in the running back room. And he's just been solid. Clyde has been kind of the touchdown monster so far in that Patrick Mahomes-led offense. We wondered kind of where Hill's touches would go and some of the other guys from that offense. Well, Clyde's been involved and he's been efficient in the red zone. We were wondering the first 3 weeks, we're like, hey, his usage numbers are not great.
No.
But all of a sudden this week he gets 19 carries, pops it off for 90-some yards, and, he's looking solid. But people might be looking at that with some rosy-colored glasses where you could get decent trade value out of him right now. Yeah. And you can make a pretty good argument for Dobbins still having good trade value. He's on the rise right now, so I could go either way there.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think you're right on track there. And then the unfortunate part of this one, of our podcast every week, but need to be known basis, is key injuries and some guys that target based off these injuries. And this week was a doozy. There was some big names, some long-term injuries, and just some question mark injuries in general. So we're going to get down the list here. The biggest question mark one that I don't think anybody really saw coming, Cordero Patterson was put on IR this morning after having a minor knee surgery. Weird. Garrett and I both talked about this right before we got our podcast rolling. Patterson scored a touchdown yesterday, went on the sideline, never saw the field again. Everybody was kind of guessing, yeah, maybe he's had an injury, but why is he all suited up still? Didn't know what was going on. To hear he's put on IR right away this morning and then had a surgery, it was like, what? Like, what? Nothing really came about it like that he was hurt that bad. So, kind of crazy.
Yep, came out of nowhere there. Another big one, Javonte Williams with a torn ACL. He'll be out for the season.
Sad. Javonte, everybody expected him to be a monster this year. Then the signing of Gordon, and just hasn't worked out for him. And to have that ACL injury is not good. You see a lot of those guys have a hard time coming back to full strength. Mm-hmm. But, we have seen guys like Saquon, Delvin Cook, all of them to bounce back real well. So
yeah, it's actually a really similar situation to J.K. Dobbins.
Yeah.
Kind of a shared backfield his rookie year, looked pretty good flashes, torn ACL right before the season for Dobbins and 4 weeks in for Javonte.
And then the most gruesome injury, I would say, of the weekend or of the week of football. If you haven't seen it already, it was nasty. Tua Tagovailoa got a concussion, and it wasn't good. We'll just go from there. It sounds he's already out or announced that he's out week 5, and with the major concussion that he had, Expect some time that he'll probably be sidelined here. I don't see Tua coming back anytime in the near future for them from that concussion.
Yep. Sounds like they're gonna, do right by him, take it easy, especially after the week before. And then it came out today that they actually fired um, their
Medical trainer.
medical trainer who's responsible for evaluating and performing the concussion protocol. Sounds like some of the steps were not executed to the T that they hoped. But we obviously that's a rough situation, and we hopefully Tua can bounce back at some point this season. Just moving on here, Rashad Bateman with a foot injury. Kind of right now, things are still up in the air. We're still waiting for a little bit more information to see what the extent of that one is.
Yeah, and it sounds like it is a mid-foot injury. Don't know the extent quite, like Garrett said. And then Garrett already mentioned it. Keenan Allen, hamstring re-injured. Doesn't sound like he's playing in week 5 again. He missed week 4, missed week 3, and week 2. So he's been out already for a little while. And then one that seemed not so good after the game, but it sounds like we got a little more clearance on. Jonathan Taylor, ankle injury. They thought it was going to be a high sprain at first. There is now a chance that he can play on Thursday. Sucks that he has a game on Thursday because he probably would be likely for Sunday, but now that it's a Thursday game, not that much time to heal. He could possibly miss this week. It's up in the air right now.
Yeah. In the same realm, we have Daniel Jones, who had an ankle sprain. We watched him go out of the game, and then Tyrod Taylor comes in. He gets a concussion, so for a little bit, the Giants were playing with Saquon Barkley in the Wildcat offense. So Daniel Jones, we do expect him to be back.
Yes.
As far as we've heard, it sounds like the Giants are going to sign a couple of quarterbacks, one if not two, just in case. But kind of a wild situation there for a little bit.
Yeah, it does sound like it's a high ankle sprain, which we know those have a higher chance of re-injury. But the fact that he came back and played is a good chance that we see him probably play again this week. And then Garrett already mentioned this one as well. Jahan Dotson, 1 to 2 weeks, hamstring injury. See a bump up in targets probably for Terry McLaurin and Curtis Samuel in that offense.
Yep. Another one here, Traylon Burks with turf toe. I'm not sure yet how long he's going to be out, if at all, but that is typically a nagging injury that guys kind of deal with for 6 weeks plus. It just kind of like is on and off and on and off, and then guys will miss practices, but play sparingly. It all depends on the extent. Everybody's case is a little bit different.
Yeah. And then the last one, this guy hasn't been too fantasy relevant this year, but Jamison Crowder broke his ankle, and he will be out for the year, put on IR. So, like I said, Crowder hasn't really made a name for himself, which was kind of shocking. McKenzie really took over that role, so probably wasn't rostered in many leagues. But
Kale, do you think with Crowder going out, that opens up anything for Cook in that offense? We've seen him pretty quiet thus far.
Yeah, honestly, Crowder went out, and the guy who took his snaps was the 5th-round rookie Khalil Shakir. He actually, I saw, had a couple snaps and a couple targets. So, no, I don't think that really helps Cook too much, which is kind of saddening, considering Cook was a 2nd-round draft pick. So,
all right, on to our main event here. As usual, we go through our studs and duds for the week, our top performers in each category, quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end, and our 3 duds for the week that we pick for each position. Kale, you want to rip us off here with the quarterbacks?
Sure. Quarterbacks is a new group. We usually have never – well, we haven't seen any of these guys yet this year, so it's good to see some other quarterbacks performing. We've seen Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts most weeks. So, quarterback 1, Jared Goff, and actually both quarterbacks are from this game, Jared Goff and Geno Smith. This was a shootout, very, very high-scoring game. Goff ended up having 378 yards for 4 touchdowns and 1 interception, which was a really good game considering he was missing his top 2 targets in Amon-Ra and DJ Chark. So, kind of shocking to see him go off that way. And then Geno Smith, he's been a shocker, to say the least, for the Seattle Seahawks this year. outperforming Russell Wilson so far, they would say.
Mm-hmm.
And he has had 320 yards for 2 touchdowns, 0 interceptions, and 7 carries for 50 yards and 1 touchdown in that game. So very good fantasy performance out of him. And then, yes, we talked about Russell underperforming. He did finally have kind of a breakthrough week. Wasn't that good because, but it wasn't bad. Russell Wilson, 237 yards, 2 touchdowns, 0 interceptions, 4 carries for 30 yards, and 1 rushing touchdown. So rushing touchdowns obviously have a bigger factor, and rushing yards have a bigger factor. So see him use his legs a little bit more. It was after Javonte went out, so that was, kind of a bonus for Russell Wilson, is that he will probably see more rushing attempts himself, maybe tucking around a little bit.
We'll hope so. Finally got that bounce back from him.
Yeah.
Our 3 duds from the quarterbacks. Our first one, Trevor Lawrence, who had a nice, solid game last week. Seemed like a nice bounce back or a nice breakout game for him.
Yeah.
Went 11 for 23 versus the Eagles, 174 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception, and 4 fumbles. So very, very rough outing for
4 fumbles.
That's not solid. Turn the ball over that many times. The other 2 guys, not huge players as far as fantasy goes. Marcus Mariota, who's been a streamer, 7 of 19 for 139 yards and a pick. And then Baker Mayfield, who's been underwhelming thus far, 22 for 36, 197 yards, 1 touchdown, 2 picks, and a fumble.
Yeah. Garrett, dip into the running backs here, too. I want you to talk a little about studs, because this was, and I'll cover a list of some honorable mentions.
So the running backs were finally exciting because, through the first several weeks, it was like you'd get 1 or 2 decent running backs, and then the third one would have like 15 points.
Yep.
So finally we have a week where it feels like we're back to the stud running back form here.
Yeah.
Austin Eckler finally gets his first decent game here. Who goes 13 carries for 60 yards, 2 touchdowns on the ground, 6 of 7 receiving for 49 yards and another touchdown. So 3 TDs for Eckler.
Yep.
Big game also from Rashad Penny, 17 carries, 151 yards, 2 touchdowns. Another catch for 6 yards. Monster day for him. Josh Jacobs, 28 carries, 144 yards, 2 touchdowns, 5 receptions for 31 more yards. Big day for Josh Jacobs. And the last one, Miles Sanders, who we talked about earlier, 27 carries, 134 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 more receptions for 22 yards. All these guys, big days, over 25 points apiece. Really, if you had any of these guys on your roster, they were giving you a nice big boost in comparison to the past few weeks where running backs just weren't cutting it that much.
No. And I just want to point out, like, Garrett, we added 4 this week on duds because Sanders and Penny were so close in scoring that it wasn't much to separate them. But there was also guys literally nipping at their tails for how good they did. There should have been, honestly, there was probably about 8 studs this week. Christian McCaffrey, solid game. Caught a lot of passes, which you love to see. He had about 25 fantasy points, and then he finished with Dameon Pierce, which Garrett kind of covered, had a monster game, broke a long run. He had a good game. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, 2 touchdowns, and then also Saquon Barkley had 30-some carries for like 150 yards. Yep. And so, he had a good performance for what he did. But then our duds were guys that are big-name running backs this year. So, yes, it was a good week for running backs, but also a poor week for some solid starters. So
these were guys you were relying on this week.
Yeah. First guy, James Robinson, 8 carries for 29 yards. Robinson has been on our stud list for the last 3 weeks, so to see him drop down to the duds, that's not really what you want to see. And also, what was that?
Eagles defense, man.
Eagles defense really shut down the Jaguars after the Jaguars kind of steamrolled the Chargers last week. Mm-hmm. So, Eagles are going to be a contender this year. So, and then Javonte Williams, we put in here. He played half the game, but even in his touches, it wasn't good. He had 10 carries for 28 yards, and then obviously he tore his ACL on the first play of the second half. Could have bounced back, maybe, but this last guy is a shocker, and this offense in general is struggling, so it's going to probably end up leading to him struggling, so they need to figure something out there. But Jonathan Taylor, 20 carries for 42 yards, so averaging 2.1 yards a carry, probably his lowest of all time. One reception, and then he also had that ankle injury at the very end of the game, I think it was. It was at the very tail end.
Yeah.
And then just, like those three names are all guys who, well, James Robinson and Jonathan Taylor were both top 10 running backs in rankings before that week. So,
yeah, one thing with Taylor that's puzzling thus far is like he's one of those workhorse running backs that wears down a defense as the game goes on. He's a big bull. He's big, fast, powerful. He's still getting 20 plus carries, but they're just not able to turn it out for like much in terms of overall yardage.
And he's been, I would say underwhelming, to say the least. He's been solid. You can't get wrong. But he had a huge week 1, which has been a big benefactor for how much the points. But since then, honestly, he hasn't. And week 2 he did, well enough. But he's got, for the amount of carries he's gotten, it hasn't been that productive as it were last year. It was he was getting those touches and getting the yards. So, he did start off cold though last year. But like I said, the Colts offense has just been kind of just downright bad. So,
well, here's to hoping that they bounce back as well. All right, wide receivers. Some big names at the top this week.
Yeah.
Let's start off. Justin Jefferson finally gets his redemption game after a few cold ones. 10 catches on 13 targets for 147 yards. No touchdowns. But nice big day. A lot of catches there.
One thing I forgot to add in the stats is he also had 1 carry for 9 yards and a touchdown. He had a rushing touchdown this week.
Oh, he did? Jefferson did?
Yes.
I missed that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a nice little tack on there.
Yeah.
So, yeah, nice solid day. Gets a rushing touchdown along with good reception.
Yeah.
T. Higgins, 7 catches on 9 targets, 124 yards and a touchdown. And then Mike Evans back from suspension, 8 catches on 10 targets for 103 yards and 2 touchdowns. Also, like, same vein there, Mike Evans and Chris Godwin and Julio Jones all come back. And Tom Brady gets his bounce back game as well. So he's been pretty cold thus far. But yeah, three good wide receivers there that got you some solid weeks. Big names at the top.
Mike Evans, Garrett, he's right on line again to hit that 1,000 yards of double-digit touchdowns. It's looking like it. Like I never get enough shares of Mike Evans. I feel like in all these leagues, because it's like he's kind of one of those boring picks, like we've talked about, but he's just so good, and it's always consistent. It's like last night you watch that game, and it's like, oh, Mike Evans another touchdown.
There he is again.
It's even with, like you said, those names. Tom Brady had literally his top 4 targets there yesterday, and Russell Gage, Julio Jones, Chris Godwin, and Mike Evans, and Mike Evans still was the top dog. He's still performing as that number 1. So, you just can't go wrong with that guy. And then our duds, some guys, the wide receiver ones on their teams, they just had a bad week. A couple of these offenses just had a bad week in general, so can't put too much shame on them. But Amari Cooper, 1 catch on 4 targets for 9 yards after 2 stellar weeks. So that's kind of, but Amari Cooper's always kind of been that way, where he fluctuates. Terry McLaurin, two catches on 6 targets for 15 yards, where kind of different to see Terry have such a low yardage for those catches, where this year it seems like he's been racking up those long plays in the offense. And then the stud rookie, Drake London, 2 catches on 7 targets for 17 yards. But like Garrett pointed out in our duds, Mariota only completed 7 passes. So that you can't do much with that. So yeah.
Not a good
getting into our stud tight ends. Here's another, one guy is a consistent, but some monster weeks from some of the tight ends this week. Garrett and I want to share this. We were talking on Sunday just before the games, and we both get involved in DraftKings quite a bit. And Garrett, who'd you have in your lineup that you're like, Zay Jones?
It was Zay Jones. And
Garrett had Zay Jones at his flex, who was $5,000 this week. And then he's like, Zay Jones is out. I'm just going to throw in TJ Hawkinson because he's right there too. And, all those lines are missing everybody. TJ Hawkinson had his career best in almost everything. he had, I think it was only catches that he had more and won the game, but he had 8 catches on 12 targets for 179 yards and 2 touchdowns. Monster performance. It is really encouraging to see Hawkinson, take that step up once they needed him to, because he's been kind of just quiet all year. So to see him just explode when they needed him to is just kind of crazy.
It is, but it's also so puzzling because it's like, here we have no Swift, no Amon-Ra, no DJ Chark. Now Hawkinson comes through. That offense is scoring the most points in the entire league. The Lions offense has the highest points per game.
Just bad defense.
Oh my gosh! But
and then one guy who's been literally a staple. He's been in our studs every single week so far, and I don't expect this to change too much. Travis Kelce, 9 catches on 10 targets for 92 yards and a touchdown. Travis Kelce, tight end 1, wide receiver 1 for the Chiefs this year, so you can't expect anything less. And then the gargantuan, the new guy, Mo Alley Cox, 6 catches for 6 on 6 targets for 85 yards and 2 tutties. That's a solid game, but it always seems like Mo Alley always rips off a couple of these every year. It's like
he does.
If you could pick him that week, you're gonna win. So.
Yep. He's comical because he'll go score a touchdown or score 2 touchdowns. It's like, oh, there he is again.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden
means nothing. He's nowhere to be found the next week. And then our duds, though, Garrett, I want you to cover these guys. All huge name who we listed as top tier guys this year.
Yeah.
So
big names on the duds, but one that's been reoccurring. We'll hit him first.
Yeah.
Kyle Pitts, 1 catch on 4 targets for 25 yards.
Is it time to hit the panic button?
Absolutely.
Okay. I would agree. I have 3 shares of them, so I agree though.
I only have 1 share of Pitts so far this year, and it's so difficult because obviously you're panicking, but what are you turning to? You're not going to cut him.
No.
He's too highly invested to cut him. And there's too big of a drop off in the tight end class to, move on like that.
But
I would say you move him to your bench, and hopefully you can find a streamer option that you can plug and play until Pitts proves himself a little bit.
If I have Pitts in leagues, like in redraft leagues especially, I would move him to my bench, and then I would honestly just either try trading for one or try going out on waivers and seeing if a guy if some reason Njoku, which it's crazy how much available he is in league still, but try to grab him in Njoku, a Tyler Conklin like we've mentioned in the past, or Logan Thomas, who's been seeing more and more targets too.
I got one other guy. How about Will Dissly? Through 4 weeks, he has a touchdown in 3 games.
Will Dissly got the bag this year, and everybody was shocked, because he hasn't done nothing in his career. Besides block, I would say. And he does have a connection with Geno. He's above Noah Fant in that tight end room.
Yeah.
So I like that. I like your Will Dissly toss in there. Because I know we were going to get to our waiver wires, and he was one of the guys on the waiver wires.
He was. All right, our last 2 tight end stinkers this week. Darren Waller, 3 catches on 5 targets for 24 yards. Stinker week. And then Mark Andrews does it again. 2 catches on 5 targets for 15 yards.
Yeah.
Rough. He did that week 1 as well. Big stinker week. He'll bounce back. He's a big part of that offense.
Yeah.
Not too worried there, but that's how tight ends roll, baby. Up and down.
I just want to say I am starting to worry about Waller, though. We talked about with the Adams coming in there. It could decrease Waller. I think Waller only has 20 more receiving yards on the year than Kyle Pitts. And Kyle Pitts has been a stinker 3 out of 4 weeks. So if that tells you anything about how Waller's performing, it's been not too good.
Well, Waller's last 2 weeks, 3 catches, 22 yards, 3 catches, 24 yards.
Yeah, I think he had a good week too, but I think week 1 wasn't that solid either. So, it's kind of scary because what's going to happen when Renfrow returns and that offense even has less target share for Waller? So, all right, dip it into the fun part. What most of you are probably here for, anyways. Our waiver wire ads of the week. And we kind of bounced this off of, in line of what our injuries were, the key injuries. So our number 1, this doesn't mean number 1, like who we're going for, putting the most fab on. But the first people we're going to cover here is Tyler Algier and Caleb Huntley. we want to slash those two. We'd probably choose Algier over Huntley because he saw more of the 3-down work, where Huntley saw a lot of the goal line carries out, which is very important. But Algier did well in his limited touches. He had 10 carries for 84 yards and 1 reception for 20 yards. So Algier had 11 touches and cracked that 100-yard mark. That is very efficient.
Yeah.
And usually that leads you to more and more touches, especially with Cordero out on IR. But Huntley was surprisingly efficient too, though. But he literally, I think he had all of his work mainly in the goal line. So to see him have this much yards was very impressive. And he got stuffed on another touchdown. He had 10 carries for 56 yards and a touchdown. Huntley, if you don't, that name doesn't really ring a bell. He was an undrafted free agent in 2021. So Algier was a 5th-round running back taken this year out of BYU, and Huntley. So they're both very young running backs.
Yeah, and that offense has been rushing the ball very well thus far.
Yes.
So, with Mariota there being a running quarterback, they're running the ball really well. And for the next 4 weeks,
Cordero's been a solid option all year too. So somebody's got to take over. You got to feel him.
Yep. Another option, kind of in the same vein, Mike Boone is a good option to add right now. Melvin Gordon is who you probably immediately think to when you think of that Broncos offense with no Javonte. But Mike Boone actually outsnapped Melvin Gordon, and he should see an increased role. Another name to watch, though, that it also just signed was Latavius Murray, who the Saints had him up for this week. He played pretty well, and then they moved him back down to the practice squad, and the Broncos went and signed him. Snatched him up.
Snatched him up.
So,
literally, though, we had Mike Boone sent in here, guys, and 3 minutes before we started our podcast, I got the notification about Murray. I told Garrett, so something might be, because Gordon did suffer an injury 2 weeks ago, and that he looked injured this week too, and he had another fumble, which we know with Gordon, he's got fumble issues. So, watch how this backfield turns out. Mike Boone seems like the one you kind of want to go after. I wouldn't put a whole lot of money on him, but he's seen just a little bit of an increased role week after week after week, and then like Garrett said, he outsnapped Gordon after Williams went down, so that's important to look at.
Yeah, he could be just a sneaky bench ad for a little bit just to see how things play out.
So, funny one here. We talked about the Lions offense a lot today, and this guy has been in the league for a while, but, and he's always been a solid fill-in guy here and there, especially when the Rams had like an injury back in the past, but he's been a sneaky solid wide receiver so far this year. So Josh Reynolds, he has had 7 receptions on 8 targets for 81 yards. But right now, he seems kind of locked in at that wide receiver 2 role. It seemed like Chark was after week 1, but he actually kind of just kept inching in his way in. And he's had over an 80% snap share through the first 4 weeks. Like, that's not like just because he boomed up this week. No, he did almost the exact same snap percentages all 3 weeks. In the past 3 weeks, he has done, I think he's had right around 80 yards he's averaging a game, but he is actually in the top 20 for wide receiver rankings right now.
Yeah, he's scored over 10 points the last 3 weeks.
Yeah, so sneaky guy. And his availability is like crazy. You can get him in most leagues right now.
Yeah, if you're hurting for some wide receiver help, he's a good depth add, especially if we can see an increased time off for any of these other players that are out right now in that offense.
Yeah, the one red flag with Josh Reynolds is his play style and his role is what Jameson Williams will be, more than likely. So whenever Jameson Williams returns from injury, which we haven't heard much about, so it doesn't sound like it's in the next week or two, that could potentially hurt Reynolds' factor a little bit. So
yeah.
But he's got that repertoire with Goff, like I mentioned, from all the way back in the Rams.
Yeah. All right, next guy on our list, we talked about him a little bit earlier, Brian Robinson, finally returning to practice. I am not as high on this guy, but if you are of the belief that he's somebody who's on the up and up and a guy who's going to be back contributing, now is a really good time to get that stash ad before he starts to really get back up to speed. They removed him off IR, so It's time to ramp up for Brian Robinson.
Yeah,
Gabriel,
and
you want to touch on him a little more?
yeah, like especially if you're a person who has lost, Patterson or Javonte Williams in one of your leagues, this guy is a guy you can grab, and literally you don't have to worry about him too much. You're probably going to get him for pennies if you have to put fab, or like late. He's not going to go super high in the waiver wire or waiver roll this week either. And like Garrett said, there's a lot of hype around him. So if he does become that lead back, well, good. You just got yourself a starting running back. If not, it isn't the biggest loss in the world. Javonte Williams can be dropped in all redraft leagues. I hope you do, unless it's a keeper league or it's a dynasty league. But Williams can be dropped. He's not going to play this year, torn ACL. Like I said, hopefully you have that IR slot where you can just slide Patterson in, and then you can pick up Robinson and fill that hole.
Yeah. Another guy we talked about a little bit earlier, Mo Alley Cox. Tight end comes out big again this week. 6 catches, 6 yards, 6 catches on 6 targets for 85 yards and 2 touchdowns. If you're in need of a streaming tight end, Mo Alley Cox can be your guy. If you have a guy like Pitts and you look at a decent matchup for those Colts, Cox would be a decent replacement.
I do want to say I've noticed with Ryan in that offense right now, it seems like he's hyper targeting his tight ends. Cox has had a good week this week, but also Kylan Granson had 4 catches for 60 yards, and so Jelani Woods had 2 touchdowns the week before. So he's targeting those tight ends when he needs them, and I guess it all depends on that week. But to see more like Cox get the most snap percentages, that's probably the guy you're going to want in this offense.
Yep.
And then Garrett already touched on this guy, Will Dissly. We're not going to get into it too much. We kind of broke him down already. And then the very last waiver wire ad is this guy is roughly owned in only about 50% of the leagues, but he was a highly touted rookie this year, 2nd round pick, and that is George Pickens. And he had 6 catches on 8 targets for 102 yards. Sounds like a solid game, and most of that came though when Kenny Pickett took over at quarterback. He was Kenny Pickett's number 1 guy, and he almost had a touchdown. It was big there, and he was out receiving Claypool and Deontay Johnson. So might be a little bit of a downcrease with Pickett at tight or quarterback for Johnson, but an uptick for Pickett or for Pickens. Sorry.
And one thing to note on that offense is Deontay Johnson, who I love as a player, he's starting to get the drops again, which we saw it his first 2 years in the league.
Yep.
He suffered from bad drops, and they're just concentration ones. It's happening again right now. He almost snagged a close touchdown, but there's been other plays throughout the year where it's like, man, that's maddening. And then you already touched on it with Pickett coming in. Pickens was highly targeted in that offense.
Yep.
And I know 50% owned, like a lot of the really competitive leagues, he's stashed on some benches. But he's also the kind of guy who could erupt. He's that type of elite talent and player where all of a sudden he could just go on this trajectory where he takes off and is every week starter for you, even in smaller leagues. So definitely worth rostering no matter what league you're in, and worth a stash.
I do want to point out Pickens. So I just looked up this here. When Pickett came in, he threw a total of 13 passing attempts. Pickens saw 5 of those targets. So over a 33% target share is huge for that's wide receiver 1 type stuff. We're not saying Pickens is going to get to that level, but because it's a small thing. But it was it's very positive to see. But looking at Kenny Pickett's stats, he was 10 for 13 for 100 yards and then 3 interceptions. So his only 3 completions were an interception. One, I will say, the first pass he ever threw was a pick, and I will not say it is his fault. He threw it up, 6'4", Chase Claypool against a 5'10" corner, and it kind of doinked right off Claypool's chest, right into the hands of the safety.
That was a goofy one, how it ended up, but that stat line was absolutely comical. Oh, 10 of 13, not too bad. Oh, wait, those three incompletions were actually 3 picks.
But, Garrett, I do want to break this down a little bit. I feel like with Pickett at quarterback, it is actually, it's an increase, I would say, for a lot of these Steelers players because Mitch Trubisky was not good. The only one I could see this hurting is a little bit of Pat Freiermuth which we
Mhm.
talked about because it seemed like he had a strong connection with Mitch. Where anybody else, Mitch, he really wasn't helping those wide receivers out much. Deontay Johnson's been
Yeah,
the
I don't
only
know if
one that's
Caleb
been
is
any
still on
relevance
there.
before this.
Might have just glitched out, but
Oh, yeah.
I, I, I agree with what you were saying. You were saying a bit about Pat Fryermuth potentially being a guy who could be phased out a little bit differently with Pickett coming in.
Yeah, I feel like Pickett's going to increase the wide receivers, I was saying. I said Johnson was the only one who seemed any fantasy relevance with Trubisky at quarterback, where now
Mm-hmm.
you should see a little bit more with the other three, with Pickett, who seems like he's a little bit better of passer.
Yeah, and I hate to even bring it up, but I feel I feel like here we are with another situation of the only way it can go is up.
Yeah. Yeah, but
um,
we knew who Mitch was coming into the season. There was hopes that he would turn it around, and he looked a lot like the same player of old. So,
yeah, same
um,
old Mitch there. Hopefully Pickett can come in and just give a little bit of a spark to that offense.
so for all of you that are still listening, and probably just joking around here with us, one news that just got on my phone, and might be some importance later on. Is for a team who is struggling at wide receiver. Odell Beckham Jr. is visiting the Giants again. He's having a visit with the Giants tomorrow, and so could be a little bit of rekindling in the fire there. But that offense for wide receiving depth right now is bad. Kadarius Toney injured, Wando Robinson injured, Kenny Galladay. If you find them, let us know. And so yeah, I think the top wide receiver right now is Rishi James, which is oh god. So yeah, he's got a cannon. We've seen him. He's got a higher QBR than Baker Mayfield in his career. Just know that. So all right, guys, no more joking around. With that, we'll wrap things up here for you. Stay tuned next week. Do you want? We're still rolling here.